Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I have some good news and, well, maybe bad news for at least the live listeners, and that tonight's show is not actually live. It's a pre-recorded show, but I guess the good news, or there's two parts of the good news, is myself and perhaps even our guests, there are two of them, may be in the chat room. I know that I will be. I'm not sure about them. They possibly might be. And the best part of the good part of the news is that these are one-on-one, face-to-face interviews in person, and there's nothing more engaging than that, in my opinion. So these are great interviews with these two people. The first person is Don Schmitt, repeat guest, known as the Roswell investigator. He was mentored by J. Allen Hynek. That's mostly what we're going to be talking about. It's a heartfelt interview and by far the best talk I've ever had with Don Schmitt. So I really think you'll enjoy that a lot. The second part of the show is with someone I met out here. I've never heard her talk before, and she's wonderful. And her name is Allis Druffel. Her mother is the noted ufologist Ann Druffel. And everybody knows Ann Druffel and ufology out this way. I had never heard of her, but boy, was she so well known. And what a childhood Allis had with her 5 siblings. She's going to be talking about that. She'll also be talking about her mother's very close friend who passed away in 1971 at the young age of 51 years old, and that's James McDonald. It's a fascinating interview about James McDonald and the work he did. Also, some photographs are going to be talking about, and documents and much more. It's a great show. I'm really excited about it. I think you'll love it. And so as far as the people that support the show, I want to thank you so much. We could definitely not do this show without you. Anyone can support the show, even here on YouTube. All you have to do is go to podcastufo.com, and you can help us out for $2 or more a month. It would be greatly appreciated. And so that's it for me. We are starting out right now with the one and only Don Schmitt. Don Schmitt, welcome to the show once again.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and it's always fun. As we were just mentioning a little while ago, I think you were one of the first people that I had on my show. Like number 4 or something like that out of 280, whatever it is.
280.
289,
my God.
I think,
so
yeah.
You finally are getting it right. So
Well, trying. As some of the people will know, I've had a few technical difficulties while going live, so I just haven't been able to.
I think the last time I was on with you, your dog was having some difficulty, and then you lost your dog.
Yeah, we lost the dog.
So,
yes, and I got a really nice note from you, and I do remember that. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So you're here at the Congress to actually talk about J. Allen Hynek, who I think is fascinating now, and you knew him pretty well.
Yes, I did, and I miss him. I miss him in the sense that not only was he my mentor, but he became not only a good friend, but he became a bit of a father figure in a field that there are a lot of loners. There are a lot of people that just march to whatever drum they decide. And for me, it created a level, a discipline, in that there were certain parameters that we needed to abide by. And as a result, I saw a level of bravery in him for not only still trying to always remain the consummate scientist, but willing to buck as far as the tide of public opinion. And as a result, I saw that he very often isolated himself. And it was all the more reason that he confided to us. We became, in many ways, his secondary family in that regard. His wife, Mimi, during that time, she was the only one within his own family. He had his own children, but they weren't into the topic at all. And Mimi, even after Alan passed away, she still, she came back to our board of directors. We were so pleased that we quickly renamed the Center for UFO Studies in his honor, and to this day, the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. And she accompanied us on our first archaeological dig to the Roswell debris field.
Wow.
And she commented a number of times, "Alan would be so proud of you boys." And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he schooled a whole number of us to carry on, to follow in footsteps, that here was the true father of modern-day ufology. And even as he happened to be at the right place at the right time, having been the astronomer physicist at Ohio State, just down the road from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and as Project Sign and then Grudge and then the most famous Blue Book was established, that he wasn't even head of the department at that time, but he was the only one who agreed that, well, I'll come on, I'll become your scientific consultant. And he became their chief debunker, so to speak. He was the one who always went before the press and explained away whatever incident, whatever case, had come to their attention at the time.
Do you happen to know what his thoughts were prior to when he actually changed his thoughts? But I mean, early on, did he just think it was total bunk himself?
Absolutely. He thought, and he often suggested that he felt that this was nothing more than a part of the silly season, as he would call it. That that first major wave of the summer of 1947, that it was the lazy, hazy days of summer, and that people just for want of something to do, that this was going to be a passing phase, and that would be the end of it. And then especially as the phenomenon, the reports escalated, and then even after the tacit dismissal at Roswell, and the reports were squelched. The reports died, but nonetheless the sightings continued. And then with that big wave in 1952, and he already had been called on to assist with Project Grudge, and then working with the first director of Blue Book, Captain Edward Ruppelt, and he saw that that they could really make some substantial effort into demonstrating that there was a true phenomenon, yet he still remained quite the skeptic. So this was a gradual change. And long before my involvement, I mean, I wasn't involved with Dr. Hynek until 1978, the last 8 years of his life. But nonetheless, in becoming a student and listening to him describe to us how he would very often interview pilots, both commercial and military. And he would listen to some of the most profound descriptions, of close encounters. Aircraft, area objects that clearly were not of our technology back in the 50s and 60s. And then week after week, or month after month, going from Illinois, from Chicago, from Evanston, more specifically, down to Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and sifting through all the current reports. And where's this case? Where's that case? I spoke to that SAC officer. Where is that? And they'd act like they didn't know what I was talking about. And he said, I saw very early on that they were censoring the reports. And I was getting just the mundane. I was looking through, expecting to see a follow-up on these cases, and they were nowhere to be found. So he says, I realized that all the hardcore cases, as he would put it, were going upstairs, were going elsewhere. Where that was, he had no idea. He had no idea, because he was of the impression Blue Book was it. It was the official investigation. And then more and more he realized that all of these people can't be lying. We're talking about PhDs. We're talking about trained professional people that are describing, the same characteristics, the same, flight characteristics that defy conventional explanation. And then the case in Socorro in April of '64, which he immediately, concluded was a vehicle. Something actually physically touched down and left those, depressions in the ground and the charred, the sagebrush still at the site.
Creosote brush, yeah.
And then Dexter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he got in trouble there with the swamp gas explanation. Yes. But as he emphasized to us, but that was only one sighting at that time, and it happened to be a farmer over a marsh, which could very well have been marsh gas, swamp gas. Yeah. But he got labeled. And then Congressman Gerald Ford at the time, and I'm getting into a lot of things I'm going to be covering in my talk, but nonetheless, it demonstrated not only the human side of what science should be, but the fact that it's that classic line in The Day the Earth Stood Still with the Professor Barnhart, who plays almost like the Einstein scientist in the movie. And he's asked, and a comment is made, "You have faith, Dr. Barnhart." And he responds, "It's not faith, it's curiosity that makes good science." And that was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. That was one of the things that he always emphasized to us. And that was never lose that little boy wonderment. That every time you look up at the stars, let your imagination just, go wild. Wow. And I love that about him. And that's why when I said I still miss him, because we're rudderless within the ufology presently. Everybody is allowed to just speak out and say whatever they want to and believe whatever they want to. And there isn't that governing force any longer. And maybe it's there and I'm just not seeing it, but with Hynek, and especially for the fact that he went from just total abject debunkery to the point that, and the last time I actually sat down with him, and he went, "Don," and he pounded his fist, he went, "Don, it's smacking more and more of nuts and bolts." And for an astronomer, especially, it's just addressing the distances from planet, point A to B, and just how does another intelligence traverse, as far as Alpha Centauri being 4.3 light years away, our closest star system, and it's just beyond human comprehension. And yet he was willing to comprehend that, to try to deal with that. And those are all the things I loved about him. Because he was not only that human as a scientist, but he was also that genuine. He was still the foremost scientist, but in dealing with something beyond the human pale, beyond our own existence, that he loved to contemplate what was out there. That just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's right. And, the phrase of, as far as they can't get there from here, I've heard a few different people say, well, obviously they can.
Obviously they can.
There's something in physics they have figured out
They've
that we
mastered.
haven't.
They've precisely.
Yeah.
And with Alan too, with Dr. Hynek, when he was, sitting in the comfort of it, he had his recliner at home, and he had his box of all his remotes. And, it was his master controls, it was almost like his Kirk having his control chair, in the Enterprise, that type of thing. And we'd all sit around him. It was almost like sitting at the foot of the master, so to speak. But then it was basic, speak freely. What do you think? What do you believe about this case or that case? And I remember on one occasion talking about the Van Allen belt. Just the possibility that had to be a planet or something at one time. And the thought that there may have indeed been another planet between the Earth and Mars. And he would go on, and I thought, well, what if there was indeed intelligent life on Mars at one time. And whatever caused that belt, that planet, to self-destruct, or was it something that you tore it apart, pushed Mars out as far as in a deeper orbit, caused, some type of catastrophic, and some of them were able to evacuate. It wasn't like they were flying to another star system, it was just hopping to the next planet. And they've been here all this time, maybe in underground bases, bottom of the ocean, what have you, and they continue to perpetrate the impression that they're from out there, when in reality, they're from right here. And he'd go, I love it.
Huh.
I love it.
So he was really open-minded.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'd like to take a little bit of a jag here, and that's kind of a pun intended. And earlier when you and I were talking in the lobby, you told me your story about traveling around with William Shatner.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and when I say jag, you'll understand the pun.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell that story about when you were in that one theater?
Well, first of all, and it was something that even after Dr. Hynek passed away, and Mark Rodiger, who stepped in first as the deputy director of QFOS, and then we had an election, and then he actually became Alan's successor. And we would go to like WindyCon in Chicago with the thought, how do we break into the ranks of the science fiction audience? And we finally realized that, it's because we're encroaching on their territory. We're essentially making their fiction into nonfiction, and they were threatened by that.
Huh.
And we broached that, and we crossed over that boundary, that almost forbidden, area of society that, was in total resistance to ufology. And the next thing I know, I'm doing a lecture in Charlotte, North Carolina, by a gentleman by the name of Rick Starnes, who was president of Starlight International, something like that. He did these Trekoramas, these Star Trek conventions. And he goes, Don, I have an idea. Have you ever done? And well, no, I've never done science fiction. We tried, but he says, I'm interested in doing these two-person conventions. And the next thing I know, I'm doing two-man conventions with Captain Kirk, William Shatner. And the first time I would meet him was just after they filmed the alternative death scene of Captain Kirk in Star Trek Generations. They had just filmed it in Death Valley over in Las Vegas.
Fitting. And
I'm invited to step into the back of this limo, and there, Captain Kirk. I couldn't help it. Captain Kirk, not that I reacted that way, but it was just amazing for me.
Yeah.
And I already had done shows with John Delancey and George Takei and Jimmy Doohan and Walter Koenig and a few of the others, but this was Captain Kirk. And we spoke at the Coliseum in Lubbock. And I kind of joked about, well, I'm sorry you had to die. And he kind of, Don, they killed me. They killed me. He just kept going on how they killed him. And we would finish at the Coliseum, and we were scheduled to do the San Antonio Theater that evening. So we had to catch a plane from Lubbock into Dallas and then fly into San Antonio. And even through the Dallas airport, he is carrying this huge leather garment bag like a saddle over his shoulder. And Rick Starnes, the producer, and myself, we're trying to keep up with him as we're keeping up a fast pace to get to our gate. And escalators, he's running up the steps, and come on, boys, and everybody, he's wearing these little granny glasses, and everybody's pointing because they recognize, there goes Captain Kirk, So we arrive in San Antonio, and there's a limo waiting for us, and it's for Bill Shatner and myself. And I'm sitting in the back seat with Captain Kirk. And we pull up to the San Antonio Theater. And the people are lined up on both strips of the sidewalk. And Bill's looking out, and he's going, look at that, Don. we got a sellout. And I look out my window, and I look up, and there I see on the marquee of the Alamo Dome, tonight only, the Rolling Stones. And I'm like, Bill. And he looks out, and, oh, no, we're doomed. And he stayed in the green room. He wouldn't come out. He was so sure that, And finally, Rick Starnes, the producer, comes bursting into the room. We got to sell out. 2,500 people, that type of thing. Oh, I knew it, He acted so he was so proud. So I'm up on stage, and typically what we would do is I would do an hour on Roswell. And he would then do an hour, he would tell some wonderful stories, behind the scenes, of Star Trek.
Stuff.
And even T.J. Hooker and all the questions, like Heather Thomas and that type of thing. And I don't want to go into any details there, but I loved it. But it was just before our Roswell movie came out. So I even had some trailers that I was showing for the upcoming Showtime movie.
Yep.
But if you've ever been up on stage, and all the stage lights, you can't see beyond the first few rows.
Yeah.
But out of the corner of my eye, I see sitting at the end of the front row, just sitting there, beaming up at me, and there's Bill Shatner. Just smiling like, Don, we did it. And later, we're backstage, and a stagehand comes running up, Mr. Shatner, where were you? We were looking for you. We were trying to find you. And he goes, well, I was out in the audience. I was listening to Don. He says, well, you never guess who was backstage wanting to meet you. Well, who? The mayor? No, Mick Jagger. So while Shatner was in the front row, Mick Jagger was pacing back and forth behind the curtain, separating the two of us, right behind me. So I was sandwiched between Mick Jagger and Bill Shatner while I was giving a talk on Roswell.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So I know we went off of J. Allen Hynek quite a bit, but I wanted to hear that story.
But Hynek loved celebrity. I mean, we're doing Close Encounters and with Spielberg, and he didn't get along with Richard Dreyfuss. You might know, Martin, that originally Spielberg, they tried to do the movie without Dr. Hynek. They thought,
you mean without his advice?
Without his involvement, without his advice.
But he's the one who coined the phrase.
Precisely. In his book, UFO Experience.
Yeah.
And then I think it was partly because the legal department said, well, we may need to get permission. So that's when he invited Alan on to the set. And
it's a good decision.
It was a good decision.
Yeah.
But, and then that wonderful cameo at the end on Devil's
Did you know him during that time?
No, it was just before. Just before.
Yeah.
But I did have the opportunity of, after he went to the premiere, and then we were all back at the residence back in Evanston, Illinois, and we were sitting there after dinner that evening, and I went, so Alan, I suppose now Close Encounters is your favorite UFO movie? And he went, no. It's still The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Oh, really? Isn't that something?
And it was. It remained The Day the Earth Stood Still,
now,
which is
was
mine.
That 1951?
1951.
Wow.
Michael Rennie, certainly, and the Gort the robot. And just,
so did he actually see it when it was out then, and he was actually involved in the UFO topic at the time when that movie came out, or was that after? I'm trying to think.
It would have been shortly thereafter, because he was on the tail end of Grudge, which was 51, and then Blue Book in 52, fall of 52. Yeah. So, but then remembering that he came in as a complete skeptic. So I don't recall that he ever mentioned having seen the film until it actually, premiered on television. I remember it premiered on NBC Saturday Night Movies.
Really? Wow.
Scared me to death. That rope. I mean,
I
Gort.
saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it young, and it scared me too. Yeah.
Woke up many a night with that robot stepping into the bedroom doorway and seeing that shield lift.
Yeah. Very, very cold. That's what I remember. Now, did Hynek actually remember hearing about the Roswell incident when it happened? Because that just went away and nobody remembered it. But he actually remembered it when it first happened.
He only became, from all indication, when I was there, when I would watch, and if you remember who the true father of the crash retrieval, and people would always think it's Stan Friedman. It actually was the late Len Stringfield.
Yep.
When he did that talk at the MUFON Symposium in Dayton, what better place, Dayton, Ohio. And Len, at the time, lived in Cincinnati. Len didn't like to fly. So that was one of the reasons that it attracted him, that he could just drive right over to Dayton from Cincinnati. And that was in July of '78. And so it was the first time that he presented, his retrievals of the third kind. And he got into the whole as far as, possibility that there have been crashes. And he was developing, this roster of all these sources, all these leads, anonymous as it turns, as it sadly always remained, that he had all these leads of all these potential crashes. One of them was Roswell, because he was one of the first people to talk to Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer from Roswell.
Wow.
And that was Hynek's first contact with even, that possibility that there have been some retrieval cases. And Alan spent the better part of the next few years trying to get Len Stringfield to open his files. And I'll never forget when we had the UFOs conference at the Midland Hotel in Chicago. And Alan, Dr. Hynek, spent all this time meeting with Stringfield in his room, in his private room. And we waited outside in the hallway. And never forget how Alan walked out, and all he kept saying was, "I feel so sorry for you, Len. I feel so sorry for you." Because Alan struck out. Wow. That he couldn't get him to break his promise of confidentiality.
Wow.
He was that honorable, that principled a man. And he also felt that it allowed him to remain a magnet, that people could then go to him with such confidence, that he wasn't going to betray that confidence. And Alan tried, and he failed. And yet after Dr. Hynek passed away, and if you remember that when Alan he came here to Scottsdale, he retired here, because he had been promised all types of money as far as research funding, and which never came to fruition. But he left. He still remained scientific director at UFOs, but we felt detached. We felt as though he had even abandoned us to some degree, because we weren't hearing anything from the Hyneks any longer. And he was willed, when he had retired from Northwestern University, an old abandoned observatory in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, of all places.
Wow.
So the hope was that he and our chief investigator at the time, who was Alan Hendry, and Alan was more of a tech writer, a technical writer, who would leave UFOs, and he became a tech writer at Hughes Aircraft in Tucson. I would even stay with Alan on one occasion, I had a speaking engagement in Tucson. But he and his wife, Elaine, and Elaine was a former student of Alan's, and she was the astronomer in their family. So it was Elaine who followed Alan to Scottsdale after the Hendry split. So the plan was that Alan was going to invite her to rebuild, assist him in rebuilding this abandoned observatory, and then she was going to run it. But little did we know that Alan was also going over to Corona, New Mexico. So after he passed away, we found all these handwritten notes. He was interviewing the ranchers and the families out in the Corona area where the crash originally took place in 1947. He was following up on this.
Wow.
And at the top, this needs to be followed up on. So he was investigating Roswell. We had no idea.
Wow.
So
did those notes in your investigation, did those notes help you in any type of way?
It's corroborated.
Yep.
With people that we then, a few years later, actually interviewed ourselves for the first time. And it just, I guess the point being, if they impressed Alan well enough, well, they also impressed us. And in a similar situation where I went into Roswell as a complete skeptic, The point being that as Alan went into the subject as a complete skeptic, and we both made the 180, that the evidence, and I think that's what he was also talking about, and not losing the little boy wonderment, because Alan hated to be behind a desk. He loved being in the field. We talk about whether it was being hoisted up on their shoulders after the plane landed in Papua New Guinea to investigate, to follow up on the Father Gill case, or as far as Hessdalen up towards the Arctic Circle, and Alan, trudging through all that snow. I mean, he was 70 years old at that time, and knee-deep snow, and all he came home with was a bad cold from that situation. I remember driving him around, and Evanston sitting next to me just sneezing and coughing like crazy.
Wow.
And feeling so proud that there he was, still leading the charge.
Wow. Let's go back quickly to the Father Gill case. That's such a fascinating case.
Oh, absolutely.
What was his conclusion on that? Did he come to some type of conclusion?
You have to remember that Dr. Hynek didn't investigate the Gill incident as a consultant to the Air Force. It was years later.
I see.
And then even when Father Gill came to America, and then he spent time at the Hynek residence. And Alan, spent all that additional time with him. Alan was totally convinced, totally impressed with the Gill case.
For the person that doesn't know this amazing case with the flashlight or whatever it was, everything, the beings on top of the craft and waving and all that.
Was it 57 or 58?
Yeah.
I know it's at a time just around Sputnik, but nonetheless, it was where 2 nights, as far as apart, a low hovering craft. And the first night where the object just, remained stationary, hovering over that particular mission in Papua New Guinea. Father William Gill was the head of the mission at that time. And then the next night, almost an identical situation. And this time, the people observed people.
Right.
As though they were attending this something almost like on a catwalk, on a platform, a flying platform. And the natives were waving.
Yep.
And much to their surprise, the occupants were waving back down. And Father Gill would go to what they called, a torch, which was a flashlight.
Yeah.
And he would flash it, and the object would teter.
That's
in the motion of as far as the flashlight as they would wave it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
amazing.
It was it was precise, and especially because these people were all virgin, untainted. They had no prior knowledge of the subject, and they described exactly what they saw. Their sketches were a classic, flying saucer.
I love the video of him being interviewed about this. And at the very end, he says, well, it happened, whether you can believe me or not, and it's okay if you don't believe me, but I know it happened.
But I know it
that.
happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And don't you love that as far as that? I mean, everyone, it's almost like it was a Patrick Moynihan. He was a great Democratic as far as senator. And he would always make the comment, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. And as a result, you can believe what you want, but I know what happened.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the subject of facts, I just want to take another little jag here, and that is the Roswell slide fallout. And we're talking about now. How many years is that? Like two years now, and it was May 5th.
May will be 3 years. May will be 3 years.
Amazing. Yeah. So how has that fallout been for you?
The fallout has been another revelation, another education, as far as in the life of Don Schmitt, in the notion that not being a scientist and having to rely on professional people in performing due diligence, and at the time working with anthropologists and forensic experts, pathologists, who you would expect would know their fields, would know when you show them something, now what does this look like to you? And then after being allowed to even study and do almost short of actually having a cadaver, a forensic report based on what you see within this figure, this image contained within this slide, what is your best professional estimate or consensus of what we're looking at here? And so what I learned above everything else is that even science is very unabsolute. That even when that science is not a field of consensus, that you can have a whole group of people sitting here, and just because, well, you believe something to be factual, it's still a belief until you are able to demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so I learned, for example, that just with a slide, just with a photographic image, that that Eastman Kodak determines that it's circa 1947, and that there are other slides from that collection that all demonstrate that it's from around that time period. And then when you look at the actual body contained as far as within the image, and no matter how many scientists tell you that it's not human, well, but when a viable solution comes up, and it's determined to be something very conventional, very prosaic, obviously you have to accept that. And in my case, it was never, no one is ever going to find where Don Schmitt said that this is an alien body. And in fact, no one is going to find that.
I just recorded you saying that.
That it was an alien, but when I never said that it was.
Yeah.
And that no one is ever going to find that Don Schmitt ever said that this had anything to do with Roswell. Yeah. I immediately made that disclaimer, that this has nothing to do with Roswell. Yeah. And it was something that I also, I hearkened back to with Dr. Hynek, that he always, he would clarify a situation by saying, we're investigating the properties of a phenomenon. And that's what we were doing. And unfortunately, I was surrounded by a number of people that cried smoking gun, cried Holy Grail, before anything was established. Yeah. And at the end, it came down to, Don, stand with us on this because we know we're correct. We know it's true. Yeah. And that, too, was my mistake.
Yep. Yeah. Now, is the one person that was promoting this still claiming that it's alien?
I think they've moved on. I think they're looking for the next alien, or the next slide, so to speak.
Yeah.
I did question. I spoke to a number of Indian tribe leaders, and it's something I asked them to at least look into, that if the body has been desecrated, has been disfigured, and if indeed an eye is missing, which I think anybody who's even studied as far as the Old West, that it would be the ultimate desecration of an Indian body, and you'd shoot the eyes out, which would mean that they would then forever wander throughout the earth as far as a spirit, never making it to the happy hunting ground, so to speak. And if in the mutilation of that mummy, that 2-year-old boy, if that was part of the desecration, if there would be any outcry in displaying it, putting it out, putting it as far as in a museum, if Indian leaders would have stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. I mean, that's even adding further desecration to this mummified boy. So that was the last thing I asked to check. And not that I deny for a second what it is. I want to be sure. Mm-hmm. Unlike a lot of, skeptics who just immediately after they find a flaw within the ointment, or fly within the ointment, so to speak, that all bets are off, end of story. I still want to make sure all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. And not that there's any chance of, redemption or resurrection, so to speak. No, I just want to then be able to say, yes, and we also checked into that. We also looked into that. And so the due process in that regard still continues.
Really? Okay. Now, how do you think Hynek would have felt about that whole situation, going back to him? Do you think that he just would have shook his head and said, you didn't follow a certain
protocol? Then I would have said, but then Alan, we relied on the likes of you. We relied on the scientific community. They're the ones who failed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and I don't deny that I worked with a number of colleagues, and keeping in mind that my own partner, Thomas J. Carey, he is an anthropologist. He's just his dissertation away from his PhD in anthropology.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Tom, and the more questions I would ask him, it always came down to, well, Don, do you trust me? And I had to bow to his experience, his profession. And so.
Well, like you said, it's a move on type of situation. You have to move. When something like this happens, there's been failures all along in the field.
In every walk of life, in every science. It's no different than you have a shuttle explode on you, and what do you do? And we've held NASA to the fire when you think about, and I was the first one, and used to be on our board of directors at the Center for UFO Studies, and he was an engineer, worked at Johnson Control in Houston, and he was there at the time of the Challenger explosion. And I would even bring up to him at a board meeting, a plane can crash, and the next plane, they board, the next set of people, and they go right back up. And NASA has an accident, and it grounds the entire project for 3 years. So who's being, overly cautious? Who's not willing to put it behind them? Okay, now what don't we repeat, and how do we move forward? So I guess we could do that with the slides as well. But the point being, I immediately tried to disown any connection to Roswell. So in no way should the slides and
it's
keeping
the other people around you, though. And I think that possibly you may have been used to influence that condition. Like, here's a Roswell investigator.
Right.
He's behind the slides. So, I think the showmanship and, all that of Jaime, just, it's an unfortunate situation. You're right. I know exactly what you mean about moved on to the next one.
I sat there that evening, and Tom Carey could tell you, why aren't they showing the second slide? Why aren't they showing the second image?
Yeah.
And then they finally did at the very end. And prior to that, we had only seen condensed. People are of the impression that we had the slides in our possession, that we were the ones that were then able to take them and have them examined and tested and dated and all. No. They were never, provided us as far as any such opportunity. We had to rely on scans. The placard, for example. The placard that we saw was clearly doctored. It was a script.
Really?
In fact, I would then ask, why was it that the likes of Dr. David Rudiak and Studio Macbeth, and as far as even a military officer at the Pentagon that we asked to look at this, and they would tell us that even Adobe looked at that placard and nobody was able to decipher a single letter. Yeah. And then when we actually saw it, it's like, this isn't block letter. This is block. This isn't script. Who changed that?
Wow.
And even as far as the body, that we always saw it, as far as a tight cropped image. And then when I actually see for the first time in Mexico City the full museum display, and you see the displays in the background. So the next afternoon, I'm in Jaime Maussan's office in Mexico City, and I go, Jaime, I want to see the second slide. I want to see it right now. Why do you need to see it, Don? I said, Jaime, I want to see it right now. And so by the time I left from Mexico City, I knew. It was over.
Did you think your, I don't want to say career, but the ufology field, did you think it was over for you? Or how did you feel at that moment?
Only if I allowed it.
Yeah.
Only if I allowed all the nations, because I had a lot of, my true friends and colleagues in the field just say, Don, learn from it.
Yeah.
Move forward from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's something that, as we know, there are surgeons who lose patience. Mm-hmm. And they could also throw in the towel. And that's life and death.
Yeah.
And the idea that, and again, it wasn't that it was my cop-out, it wasn't my fallback that, well, the scientists are the ones who blew it. No, I blew it. Don Schmitt blew it. I, again, instead of going even by my gut impression, Tom Carey could tell you that January, just months before the presentation in Mexico City, I wanted the bail. I kept going, Tom, I don't feel right by this. I don't like this. And he again, Don, stand by me on this. Stand by me on this.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah. Well, I still respect you, and I'm glad that you stuck
thank
with
you.
it. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All I will add, Martin, is that just imagine, and I put it this way, imagine if Travis Walton would have his experience today. I think the internet would rip him to shreds overnight.
Yeah.
I think what's happening nowadays, and I think that's where even Hynek,
social media too.
I think even Hynek, I don't know how he would have dealt with it, because I think the worst of it is, now keeping in mind that he made a major faux pas with just his labeling or explaining away one particular sighting as swamp gas.
Yes.
Amidst a flood of sightings, and he was not able to outlive that. I mean, until the day he died, he was still apologizing for that.
Wow.
So just imagine, as far as with social media today.
Yeah.
So is it any wonder any of us are able to still move forward?
Yeah.
So
well,
we move forward.
Yeah. I get hate mail and trolls and all that on, it depends on where they find me, and it's okay. I don't feel threatened by it. I just keep moving on because I like what I do, and that's what's important to me. I don't care if someone doesn't like what I do. It's okay. They don't have to listen.
And how much of it is just pettiness and jealousy, and the point that you're doing something that maybe they'll never do, and they attack you for it, because maybe you're in their way. It's not like, okay, we're all grown-ups here, let's move on. Yeah. As opposed to, let's just keep opening up the scab.
Right, right. Yeah. So going back to Hynek, what do you know about his turning point? Was Socorro part of his turning point? It
was gradual, but Socorro was probably the linchpin, was probably as far as the definitive turning point, because he had to concede that this was a nuts and bolts object that actually touched down. But he was still the good soldier for the Air Force. In fact, Paul Hardin is the Socorro historian. And if you were to go and ask, like, where did all the photographs go? There were photographs of even the footprints before they were all obscured by some of the original sightseers that came in. So there were the footprints of the 10-year-old child still present at the site.
Wow! So that was like a sandy area then.
It's a sandy. It's within an arroyo, a lot of brush, but it's within this swill, within this hollow. And in fact, there's a dummy site. There's another site that they will take you to, but it's just staged. It's down site from the original. The true site only a few people know about, because the cluster of the stones where the landing gear touched are still there.
Yeah, Ray Stanford was there in time. And
still, precisely. And the point being that because even Lonnie Zamora himself, he was so shook, he was so upset by what he had just seen, by what he just experienced. He didn't go back to the police station. He went right to his parish priest. He thought he experienced something demonic.
That's right. Yeah, I've heard that.
And so you have all of these people who were standing with Zamora. And you have then all the photographs. And you talk to the historian, where did all this go? The newspaper, it was all confiscated by the Air Force.
Huh.
And who was the one who went and confiscated? Alan Hynek. So he was, again, still being the good Air Force consultant. And he did whatever they instructed him to do. And he gathered it all up. And it wasn't like, it's now mine, or I get copies of all this, correct? It was like, no. So nobody ever will see any of this. And that's why it's not part of Blue Book. And that's the the saddest feature in all this, and that Alan stayed with the Air Force because he wanted to have access to the data. But the data was always secondhand. It was always subpar. It was never, as he put it, as I said earlier, the hardcore cases. And Socorro was hardcore. It was as hardcore as it gets. Mm-hmm. And even there, he was robbed. Even there, he wasn't the spokesperson. You won't find any footage of Alan talking about swamp gas there. Yet 2 years later in Michigan, he was.
Yeah. Wow. Can you talk about any cases that you worked directly with him on in CUFOS?
There were either Illinois cases or even Wisconsin cases. There was a Port Washington case. There was even a Cedarburg, Wisconsin case. And in those situations, it was us going into the field, investigating the case, tracking down and interviewing all the witnesses, and then providing the final report to Dr. Hynek. The last case was just across the border, just north of Illinois. And Alan was especially keen on the case because it involved a whole group of elderly people who were outdoors for an evening. And then there was a fire that seemed to develop in the area that the UFO arrived. And the possibility that the UFO caused the grass fire. It all happened, simultaneously. And so he was leaning towards the high unusual, that type of thing. And he would often tell me that what I like about you, Don, is because you even correct me. Because we later determined that it was in the flight, that was in the approach path of a private runway, a private pilot. And he smoked. And he would, often he would toss a butt out the window as he would come in. And that's what caused the fire. That even the fire marshal didn't come up with that. Wow. And so, and we found, we later found the cigarette butt, that type of thing. And we spent all, and so, and because we were very skeptical. I mean, Alan Hendry was our chief investigator, and he was the consummate skeptic. But that's where Dr. Alan Hynek relied on us, especially in his latter years, and he would always talk about, he would always comment, I'm an old man in a hurry, I'm an old man in a hurry. And we were afraid because there was a mystical part of Dr. Hynek, in that he even suggested we need to get even magicians and psychics involved. Because how can people be fooled? Like when the amazing Kreskin did this group hypnosis at some presentation up in Canada, and Dr. Hynek was present. And Kreskin, at Alan's bequest, demonstrated that I can hypnotize an entire audience to believe that with a particular trigger, they all will just start describe UFOs. And they did. They went outside. They were all glancing up at the sky, and he rang a bell or something, and one by one, they were all, describing UFOs. So that's where Dr. Hynek, this idea of even mass hallucination, and even, psychic projection, and trickery, magic, that type of thing. And I think, and Dr. Hynek always relied on us to always kind of pull him back. That we still, we need something, as another investigator said, that you can go across the street and kick the tires. Yeah. Because that's the only thing that's going to demonstrably prove that we're dealing with an actual phenomenon.
Right. So you knew him throughout the last part of his life, and when he passed away, you mentioned going through some notes. What kind of a situation was that? Were you able to? Was it Mimi? Did you say his wife?
Yes.
Was she?
Well, she remained in
agreeable?
Scottsdale. This was where you had the Lindheimer Observatory on Lake Michigan, and Alan stored a lot of his files there. And Dr. Mark Rodiger and former board member Mark Chesney. Rodiger and Chesney were childhood friends. And they went to the Lindheimer Observatory hoping that Alan had stashed away a lot of even old Blue Book cases that weren't part of the declassified Blue Book files from 1977, that type of thing. And according to Rodiger and Chesney, somebody had rifled through, the observatory. Everything was trashed.
Jeez.
And I didn't doubt them. I just thought, wow, somebody actually beat us to the punch, so to speak. And they were, well, yes, somebody actually, had rifled through the file cabinets.
I'm not usually, or I don't think I'm a conspiratorial type guy, but that sure sounds like a conspiracy to me. Like government possibly.
And considering who we were dealing with, Alan Hynek had a top security clearance with the Air Force all those years. Mm-hmm. And we often question whether he had one till the day he died, if he had signed a non-disclosure, for example. Mm-hmm. And they kept him on a tight leash. In the last year or two of Blue Book, he was cooperating more and more with his own scientific colleagues. He was lecturing more and more. He was, doing more and more television. He was doing Merv Griffin and Tom Snyder and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think they realized that we got a loose cannon here. That now he's going to become the conduit. People are going to come to him. I mean, we have essentially, closed the curtain on our involvement. Why should we expect anybody to come to the Air Force any longer? And so it caused us often to wonder if Hynek was still connected to some degree. And I think that's why we hope to find all types of, secret documents. And they weren't to be found. We found those handwritten notes regarding Roswell witnesses. We found some other documents, back to the early 50s that suggested that they were concerned about, like the CIA and the whole Robertson panel taking over the project. And I know Dr. Jacques Vallée, believed that would suggest that there was another project underway at that time. And I know Dr. Rodiger and Dr. Hynek's secretary, Jenny Zeidman, who was with him from Ohio State, and then thereafter, that they investigated that, and they found, no reason to believe that. So if anything, we were able to demonstrate that as much as they may have watched, even from a distance, that Alan Hynek was still an old man in a hurry. That he felt he was hard-pressed to come up with some answers at the end. And personally, he died very bitter, very broken. Mm-hmm. I think he truly expected that he would have a courier or he'd get a phone call at the least at the end and would say, Alan, you were correct. You knew. But we couldn't tell you. We couldn't confide to you till now. But Godspeed. Wherever you go from here, you'll really know the whole story. You never got that.
Wow.
You never received that. And to me, it was often, and early on after Alan passed away, it was like, we got to finish what he started. Yeah. That he would want us to finish with. Because believe me, Martin, there was a lot of talk initially at CUFOS. How do we go on? Mm-hmm. How do we? And I think the first demonstration was that we renamed the center the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. Mm-hmm. So we were,
wow.
Yeah.
What is, just, we're out of time here basically, but what, do you have anything you can say about the man that is kind of unknown, something interesting about his personality? other than UFOs? Or
He had a wonderful sense of humor.
awesome.
He was a consummate, absent-minded professor, and he joked about it. I mean, he loved the lighter side of the subject matter. Alan Hendry, who, as our chief investigator, was a wonderful artist, often drew Dr. Hynek as far as in compromising positions, even with Men in Black and that type of thing. And Alan just reveled in it. He just relished, the opportunity, the self-infliction as far as that. And there too he demonstrated that there's nothing in life so serious that you can't step back and at the least be amused by it, but if not, have a good laugh over it and get over it and then get on with it.
Yeah.
And the point always coming back to, we can always live in the past, but it doesn't get it done. And Alan was always moving forward. Dr. Jalen Hynek always relished and looked forward to the next day and the next case, the next sighting. He listened to the mundane. I mean, he never, turned away anybody. That was the wonderful thing he taught me. And I like to believe that I too, I hear people, talk about, I just don't understand that. How do you have all this patience? It's because if they feel I'm good enough that they can, express in confidence what they can't get anybody else to talk to. And why would I want to join the legions of people who are going to laugh at them and belittle them and have a laugh at their expense? No.
Yeah, well, I just witnessed that with you in the lobby, with the woman that said, "You've always been so kind to me and listened to me."
Well, I didn't realize you caught.
I did catch that, yeah.
So thank you. Thank you.
So, Donald, as always, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you so much.
Well, I went quickly, Martin, and
You
again,
did.
thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so that was it for Don Schmitt. Now our next guest is coming up, and her name is Allis Druffel. She's the daughter of the famed UFO researcher and author Ann Druffel. She's also an environmental advocate and a classical singer. It's a great interview. As I said in the beginning, we're going to be talking about her mother, Ann Druffel, what it was like growing up in a childhood home of someone so unique as Ann Druffel. Also, James McDonald. We're going to be talking a lot about him. Another very heartfelt interview that I'm very happy about. So hang in there. We'll be right back with Allis Druffel. All right, I'm here with Allis Druffel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And you have a distinguished mother and very well known in the UFO field.
I do. A distinguished mother, Ann Druffel.
Yes.
And I was happy to be asked to the UFO Congress to present on her behalf. And I wish that I could do a somewhat Get Out parody and take her brain and put it in my head just for that hour, but I wasn't able to because she has an encyclopedic memory of
Wow.
all the UFO cases she's worked on and heard about and written, investigated.
Now, what got her started in the very beginning? What sparked her interest in the whole field?
In 1945, when she was still a young girl, she saw something over Long Beach. She was coming home from school, and right before she went into the house, she saw this big, huge craft in the sky. She did not know what it was. She was almost transfixed by it, and she states that it stayed there for about an hour and a half. Now, this was just before the end of World War II. So she thought it had something to do at first with an aircraft related to the war effort.
Mm-hmm.
But the more she stared at it, the more she understood that it did not. And the funny thing is, it stayed in the sky for an hour and a half. She even called her mother over to look at it, and my grandmother was a very kind of serious, studied person, and she came out and she said, "Oh, it's a weather balloon." And she went back, and my mother said it was not a weather balloon. And she called her mother to come back and look at it, and her mother said, "I have to cook dinner for your father." So she stared at it for about an hour and a half, and then she said it seemed to eject many other small things, as if this had been kind of like a mothership.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, she just got very, very scared and went into the house. But that
Wow.
was the beginning of her interest. But she was interested in astronomy. She wanted to study astronomy in college. And she was told by the teachers, "Oh, that's not a subject that women study."
Isn't
So
that
she
awful?
was,
Wow.
yeah, unfortunately. But she was interested in astronomy her whole life, and she became somewhat of an amateur astronomer.
Mm-hmm.
She built her own telescope. And,
Built her own telescope.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so she was always telling us things in the sky, and that's what made her a wonderful researcher as well. She could explain away 90% of the cases when people called, because she knew the sky so well, and she knew the position of the stars and the planets.
And what was for the body of the research that she did, like a time, from 1960 something to, what was the timeline on how long she researched?
I would say it was a good 50 years.
Wow.
I'm thinking mid-60s. She became involved with NICAP before it was unfortunately disbanded. And she wrote about 200 articles in
Wow.
various news publications.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And what are some of the cases, now, before I finish that thought, I was speaking earlier with Don Schmitt, and I asked him, did Alan Hynek know anything about Roswell ahead of time? Ahead of, when I say ahead of the time when it came out, so to speak, when, Stanton Friedman, found out all the information, and, the book came out after. A lot of people never remembered Roswell, and she started in the 60s, of course, that's much later in the 1947, but had that subject ever come up, that the Army Air Force said that they captured a disc, and was that just forgotten?
No, that was still very much in the minds of people. So, of course, she wasn't there originally to study it, but we grew up hearing about this. And
Wow.
there were so many, news reports, the movies, the shows about Roswell. And my mother was fascinated with that, though she never really investigated herself. But when you ask my mother, "Mom, do you believe in UFOs?" she would say, "I want to see a body or I want to see a craft before I will definitely say yes to that."
Wow.
But she heard all of the tales of Roswell. Just as a side note, on Roswell, I know a woman who's at my church, and she grew up in Roswell, New Mexico.
Huh. Uh-huh.
But she was born like around 1945. But she swears that there was an undertaker in town, and that at the time that the Roswell sighting happened, this person was called to provide 3 small caskets to the Roswell Air Force Base.
Now, has she talked about this to someone like Don Schmitt or other people that
No.
investigated? Because
No.
this may be some type of corroboration, because I think there are some people that are skeptical about that claim. How did she know about that in particular? Was it hearsay, or did she know? Do you know anything more about that in detail?
I understand that she grew up knowing that. She had heard it from family members. And she is a very, very valid, credible person. She would have no reason to make up a fabrication. Now,
Right.
I don't know if she was repeating something that was correct, but she would say, yes, this happened, according to what she heard.
Mm-hmm. So I heard you say today that you're one of 5 girls in your family? Yes. How was growing up in a family known to be interested in UFOs?
It was very interesting. I think I had a lot of experiences that, the average person did not have. So I can remember very clearly being a child, and since I was the youngest, I was the one who often answered the phone. So around Saturday night, we'd all be sitting around, and I would say 7, 8, 9 years old. The phone would ring, I would have to pick it up. And I very clearly remember once I said hello, and a man said, "Hey man, I just saw little green aliens in my backyard." I was like, okay. And I'm like, I think you want to speak to my mother. So oftentimes we would, cover the phone. We'd say, "It sounds like another one." And then there were other people who would call, and, they seemed very credible.
So was your mother known as the person to call?
Yes.
From what region, your general region, and how did people know to call her?
So her being part of MUFON LA
Okay.
and Skynet, her name and number was given to people who would call the Los Angeles Police Department, or people who would call the Griffith Observatory. If they say that they reported something in the sky, she was often top on the list to call. But there were other field investigators that would be called as well. But she would often be called. And
Wow.
this was, as I remember, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then she was active as a field investigator for probably at least 40 years.
What are some of the dynamic cases that she worked on?
I would say one of the most dynamic cases that she worked on was the Heflin Photos.
Wow.
So in August of 1965, a highway maintenance engineer, Rex Heflin, saw a craft in the sky.
He had Polaroid on him, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He saw it in Santa Ana, and he just so happened to have a Polaroid camera in his work truck, and he took 4 pictures, which ended up being some of the earliest and clearest legitimate pictures of a UFO ever seen. Investigators had always made sure that they wanted some kind of proof. They wanted a picture. They wanted, the close encounters of the second kind thing. But a clear picture was really, really very important, and there weren't that many up to that point. And Rex Heflin actually saw this. This was August 3rd, 1965. And so I would say the first 3 photos show a craft, and then the 4th photo shows the remains of a craft.
Like
He
a
said,
smoke or something.
like a smoke ring that Rex Heflin said was about 4 times the size of the original craft that he had seen. And what was interesting about this was that there were people from the U.S., the Marines, the U.S. Army, the Air Force, that came by to borrow these pictures. And he obligingly lent out the pictures to anyone who who showed interest. And it was the first 3 pictures that he always lent out, because there was very little said about the 4th picture. But in September of '65, which just 3 months after this incident, a man who claimed he was from NORAD came to his door, borrowed the pictures. Heflin just expected that they would be returned just like all of the others had been returned. But that was the last time he saw the first 3 photos until 1993. And so for almost 40 years, researchers did not have the original first 3 pictures to work with. And a lot of them were working with, you know, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generation copies. And it was really difficult to make, you know, true research from 3rd, 4th generation copies.
Sure.
So, and then the story of their return is interesting. So, Rex Heflin worked as a highway maintenance engineer for 30 years. And then he developed this lead poisoning, unfortunately, because he worked with highways and roadways so much. And then he moved up to Santa Rosa. Well, one day in 1993, there was a telephone call. And he answered. A woman said, "Have you checked your mailbox lately?" And he said no, but he went out and there was nothing in his mailbox. Half an hour later, the woman called back and said, "Have you checked your mailbox lately?"
Did he ask who it was, and did they say who they were?
He didn't. At least if he did, there was no story there. But he went to his mailbox, and there were the first 3 photos. And they were the originals, because it had all of his original markings.
Wow.
And they were returned. They were relatively unharmed. It seems like someone for the past almost 40 years had taken very good care of them.
That is so strange that they would bother to return them.
Yes, that's right. Oh, it's actually almost 30 years, excuse me.
Yeah, that's still very strange.
So the question is, why were they returned?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it would be just as easy to... They were gone so long, and, 30 years, most people are going to forget about them for the most part.
Exactly. But it was really good because in those ensuing years, James McDonald, an atmospheric scientist from the University of Arizona, had declared publicly that he did not see that photo number 4 with the smoke ring was related to the first 3 photos. Because in the first 3 photos, it seemed to show that there was like a flat clouds in the sky. But in the 4th photo, there were like cumulus clouds. And James McDonald was an atmospheric scientist. And so he didn't say, "Rex, you're lying." He just said, "I can't figure this out." And
unless it was a different part of the sky, is it possible there could be different type of clouds?
It was the first one was taken out through his window.
Right.
And the 2nd and 3rd was taken through the passenger window. And then the 3rd was taken from outside staring at a different part of the sky. But in 1993, Rex thought, I want to have another reanalysis of these photos. So that's when he reached out to Ann Druffle and Bob Wood and another researcher from CSUN. They did this whole entire reanalysis. They got a grant for this. They did mathematical calculations of how far it was, the distance and everything. And the photo 3 was really great because when they reanalyzed photo 3, they found a smoke trail coming out of it, as if the object was starting to starting to have a smoke ring emerge. So those photo 3 and 4 were shown to be conclusively linked by that. And no one had that in the 1960s.
Wow. Now, have you physically held these photos in your hand?
I have.
You have? Wow.
I have, yes.
And where are they now?
Rex Heflin entrusted my mother with them. So they're in Pasadena.
Yes.
They're in Pasadena in a safe. My mother bought a special safe 15
Yeah.
years ago, put them in the safe, and about 2 months ago, I said, Mom, we have those Rex Heflin photos around here, don't we? She's like, yeah. So there was the safe. We found the key, and we held them for the first time. It was quite exciting.
Isn't that something? Now, I've talked to a number of UFO researchers as far as, important documents. For instance, Travis Walton has letters from Betty Hill. There are Blue Book files that were found by a gentleman in Ohio that were basically sold on Craigslist. There's a lot of documents now. I know Klaus Svan in Sweden, they have a great archive. They have a great way to store things. But I think there's a lot of relevant documents, papers, and books that need to be preserved, including, images like this and other great images. But it's exciting because let's just say down the road, 50 years from now, where are those photos going to be? Is there a plan? Do you know?
That's right. No, actually in my talk today, I said, we're going to have to find a place for my mother's UFO files. And I'm sure that's on her mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going through her filing cabinets, oh my goodness, it's like a treasure trove there. The photos, the
Wow.
original interviews. She has tape recordings of witnesses.
This sounds like a documentary to me in the making.
Right. And
Wow.
I don't know if this is a good time to go to James McDonald, because I could tell you a little bit
Yes,
about...
I'd like
Yeah.
to. A man that's always fascinated me, and with a tragic ending, but someone that was really bringing a lot of credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, so I'd like to talk about. Did you ever meet him? Did your mother ever meet James?
Yes, my mother met James several times. So, James McDonald, an atmospheric scientist from the University of Arizona at Tucson, he was also professor of meteorology, and he did a lot with weather modification and cloud physics. He was very, very well known in his field, very prolific. He had the type of mind that I hear from several researchers that just went constantly. Just one of those people, searching, asking questions, searching, getting answers, going to here from here. It seems like sometimes when you hear him talk, I think his mind worked faster than his mouth could produce the words.
Mm-hmm.
But very, very brilliant man, and he became very excited by the subject of UFOs and started researching UFOs in Arizona.
Do you happen to know what made him get interested in it? Because of his study of atmospheric?
I wish I knew the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
I would direct people to my mother's book, Firestorm, Dr. James E. McDonald's Fight for UFO Science.
Mm-hmm. There we are. Let's hold that up a little bit.
Oh, yes.
A little bit higher, so it's in the camera right there. Perfect.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I have heard about this book before.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it has more of what really got him interested, but I think the fact that he could explain a lot of things. You know, the UFO phenomenon was really hitting its peak in the mid-1950s. He worked as an atmospheric physicist. He could look up and he could say, this type of cloud, what is this in the sky? And I'm sure it was partly scientific curiosity that drew him to this. But we're sure glad that he did, because he studied the UFO phenomenon for 8 years before he came out publicly to work in the public arena with people from NICAP, with governmental sources. He actually produced publications And he would go to scientific symposiums and he would present on the UFO problem, because to him it was a matter of science. He thought, when you take out everything, when you take out the psychological issues, when you take out the easily explained phenomenon, when you take out the weather phenomenon that was poorly understood, you're left with some very, very credible cases. What do you do with those? What are these things? And so here's something: Unidentified Flying Objects, Greatest Scientific Problem of Our Times by Dr. James E. McDonald. This is something he produced in 1967.
Wow. Interesting. Can you open the...
Sure. Yeah, so this is an example of something that he would bring to...
It looks like that. Just what I thought. It looked like typed,
Yeah.
like letter typed pages.
Right.
Mhm. And so he published this basically.
Yeah, and he would bring it to symposia, scientific symposia. He would bring it to investigators all over the country. And this is a long way of saying, yes, my mother met James McDonald several times. Whenever he traveled and he came to Los Angeles, he would be sure to meet with the LA NICAP subcommittee, LANS.
Mm-hmm.
And she was fascinated. Everyone who met him was like grateful in a way to have such a scientific voice talk about this
Mm-hmm.
and to bring legitimacy to the issue. And James McDonald had a great deal of legitimacy in his own research and in the UFO field. He had great legitimacy from investigators.
Hmm. Did he do any personally investigating himself, as far as you know?
Yes, he did a great deal of investigating. So, for example, in 1965, he took a stab at investigating the Heflin case. So in 1965...
That's right, I did know that,
That's
yes.
right, that's
Mhm.
right. And I was correct. In 1967, he went on site to investigate the Heflin case, and they went to the place where Heflin was parked. They went to El Toro Marine Base, and then later that evening, there was a huge 30-person meeting of the LA NICAP subcommittee talking about the Heflin case. And McDonald was there, Heflin was there, one of the researchers that was working on the Project Blue Book was there, and so he did. And I just want to tell you what he left after his passing. He left a treasure trove of UFO files.
Mhm.
So in the 1990s, there were several people that went to his home in Tucson to catalog all of his UFO files,
Mhm.
and it came to 29 boxes.
Huh.
And in this, it included correspondence with a multitude of contacts, interviews with people who had seen UFOs, voice recordings, materials connected with numerous seminars, such as the one that I showed you, 4 handwritten journals, and
Huh.
when Project Blue Book ended with the disappointing Condon report, James was so concerned over the fact that some of these things would be destroyed that he went to Maxwell Air Force Base and he copied 580 of the radar visual files. He was the first person actually allowed to do this. He studied them, he copied them, and then he brought them back to his home.
Hmm.
So this is part of what he left. And thank goodness, the University of Arizona, there is a place where people can access the McDonald UFO files, and of course, as well as his research into weather modification and atmospheric physics.
Wow. So there's a good case right there of something that is going to be well kept and safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great. When he was doing this research and actually sticking his neck out after the Robinson panel of 1952, basically debunk and ridicule and all that, what type of ridicule do you know that he was getting from his colleagues or other people?
Right. So, you know about the 1968 UFO Symposium Committees by Congress. He appeared.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
2 times he was asked to give testimony at congressional hearings. 1968, he appeared with other scientists, such as Dr. Carl Sagan and J. Allen Hynek.
And Friedman was actually there, too. A non-scientist. I mean, he was
Oh,
the.
okay, that's
I mean,
great.
he.
Yes.
What did he say? He was the only non-PhD there.
Right.
Is what he said.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so he gave this this testimony on the Symposium on UFOs, which actually is very forward-thinking, first of all, for Congress to have done this.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave testimony, and all 5 out of the 6 scientists were in favor of grants, governmental grants, for research, legitimate scientific research. And he got pushback on that, but also on pushback on his UFO research in particular. I don't know if really his scientific colleagues really made him feel, humiliated. They probably just said, "Why are you doing this? We just don't understand it." But he was receiving a lot of interesting pushback from governmental sources, which came to a climax in the 1971 hearings on supersonic transporters. Now, let me go back just for a few minutes and say that James McDonald had interesting things happen to him. So, for example, one time his luggage was lost, and it seemed like it had either been taken or replaced or something or gone through. And it took several days for it to come back, and that was a really big thing because they really felt like someone had gone through his luggage. He also a couple times reported people in black unmarked cars.
Mm-hmm.
And this I completely believe because I have a friend named Reverend Al Cohen, and he has a CIA file on himself, or probably an FBI file, just because he was involved in, Vietnam War, things
Protests
like that,
or something?
protests,
Mm-hmm.
a matter of social justice issues and rallies and everything like that. And the government was very interested in people like that.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to see what they were up to and see if they were a threat
Mm-hmm.
to the government. So I can really see how James McDonald had a lot of scrutiny. But it was really sad because all he wanted to do was bring legitimacy from the scientific and governmental fields to UFO research. That's what he was fighting for. It doesn't seem to be that big of a deal, but he was really a prophet because he was doing this 50 plus years ago. So that he was on a panel in 1971, and it was for testimony for the proposed building of a fleet of supersonic transporters. Now, this fleet would have been built to replace conventional airliners. And so they had a panel of expert scientists come to Congress and give testimony. And James was very concerned because he was concerned that the SSTs flying, so high up in the atmosphere would damage the ozone layer and cause thousands of additional cases of skin cancer each year. So he was one of the very few scientists to speak out in the early 1970s about problems in the ozone layer. And his concern for this was prophetic, because it then took Congress and the international community 16 more years to come up with the Montreal Protocol, which addressed the thinning of the ozone layer. And by that agreement, they reduced things like, hydrofluorocarbons and things like that.
Aerosol.
Yes. And then some of the ozone layer actually repaired.
Right.
But he was talking about this in 1971. Unfortunately, during this testimony, especially Silvio O. Conti of Massachusetts, who I checked on Silvio Conti, Congressmember Conti, and some people would say he pushed back because some of the SSTs would have been built in his district. But Congressmember Conti seemed to be someone who cared about the environment. But for some reason, he just started pounding McDonald. McDonald was talking about SSTs. Conti went back to McDonald and he said, on the other hand, I have to ask this, because he was talking about the SSTs, because no doubt it will be brought up in debate. I have been told, Conti said to McDonald, that you are an expert on unidentified flying objects, or flying saucers. Do you think that these flying objects are extraterrestrial probes, vehicles or products, or some technology other than our own? McDonald was very taken aback by this, because he was trying to say, this has nothing to do with my testimony right now.
They were just trying to diminish him.
Yes. So basically, it was almost like a targeted attack to discredit him as a witness. So that at the end, Conti said, a man who comes here and tells me that SST flying in the stratosphere is going to cause thousands of skin cancers has to back up his theory that there are little men flying around the sky. Now, the hearing room broke up into laughter, and this was just so inappropriate.
And humiliating.
It was a public humiliation to McDonald. It was a direct attack on his science.
Yeah.
And he felt so misunderstood. Just a few months after that, he attempted to end his life. And it's almost like McDonald was such a genius and so pure, kind of, in his intentions, that the public humiliation that he received was something that, he almost couldn't deal with. And I just so wish now that he had something to fall back on.
Support.
Yeah. Something support. Some people describe him as not being able to understand his own worth, because people would come up to him and say, you're doing such wonderful work, thank you, you're so brilliant, blah, blah. And oftentimes he would just brush them aside.
Yep.
As if he didn't understand that he was already making a difference. He was already a force. I wish that he had known that.
Yeah.
Oh, can I say
go ahead.
one thing about the SST hearing? If people look this up, another person that was part of the SST hearing, the supersonic transporter, was a man named Fred Singer, S. Fred Singer, who was a scientist who spoke in favor of building the SSTs. But I'm working now on climate change and education of climate change and advocacy. And I actually know the name Fred Singer. because he then, in the 1980s and 90s, defended the tobacco industry, sowing disinformation into the public debate about the dangers of smoking.
Mm-hmm.
And those same techniques that the tobacco industry used, they used the same techniques, almost the same talking points, to discredit climate change and the science of climate change. And so it's really interesting because I'm convinced that if James McDonald had lived, speaking out about the ozone layer in 1971, and we had our first Earth Day in 1970, he would have seen climate change coming, perhaps even before Jim Hansen. James Hansen is the scientific darling who appeared in 1988 before Congress talking about climate change. I'm convinced that Jim McDonald would have been talking before. So it's just so sad that we lost him, and I wish that
At 51
he
years
could
old.
have, yeah, I just wish he could have fallen back on his understanding that he was a force. He was a force to be reckoned with. He would have continued to have been a force to be reckoned with.
I know. I've talked to longtime researchers like Ray Stanford, who did, the Socorro case, and he holds James McDonald in very high regard. Many times he's talked about what a wonderful force, as you say, he was. Now, as a tenured professor, when he was going into the UFOs, did that ruffle a lot of feathers? Do you know?
I actually cannot speak to that.
Yeah.
I know that it's more in my mother's book, Firestorm, but I'm sure that it would have ruffled the scientific community because most times people say, what does science have to do with UFOs? What does science have to do with this? People don't see the interconnection between issues, which is something we need to do now as a human species, is to see the interconnection. But to get more of that backstory, you'd have to go to Firestorm.
But I do remember, didn't he get his students also interested in the topic and working on investigating?
He may have.
I think I've heard that.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I would.
So, about your mother,
Yes.
going back to your mother, what does she talk at all about the UFO field these days?
She talks, yes. She has given presentations up to the late 2000s. She was giving radio interviews up till 2 years ago.
Oh my goodness! I wish I'd known that.
Yes.
So
And she is working on her memoirs now.
excellent. Yeah.
And a cool thing about that is I said, Mom, you need to write a book about the early years of the UFO phenomenon, the field, the investigative field, NICAP, everything. And what I realized was when I was researching this book, I realized so much of that is there already.
Oh, nice.
So it's really exciting. She had sole access to McDonald's files for
Yes.
4 years in the 1990s.
Wow. The journals
As the
is what I would be the
foundations.
most fascinated with.
Yes.
By the way,
Yes,
that's something I would love to look through.
yes. They're
Yeah.
there at the University of Arizona, and I hope they receive a lot more scrutiny and research now, especially in light of what's been happening.
We will be talking about that in a minute. And talking with Don Schmitt earlier about J. Allen Hynek and the files. His files were right after his death. His files were all rifled through. By the time, was it Robert Powell? By the time someone got there, a short time after his death, the files were all in disarray and a lot of them missing. So it's unfortunate, and preservation is, I believe, very important for these things. Now, going into this,
true.
what you just mentioned,
Yes.
Tom DeLonge gets the To the Stars involved. And by the way, I have been meaning to ask, I don't know if you followed any of that To the Stars Academy and all that. Have you looked into that at all?
Is that part of the disclosure?
Well, it's part of
Yes.
the group together.
Yes.
I have a longtime listener that keeps saying, ask them this question. He wants this question answered. Perhaps it's not a question for you, but why is there an entertainment factor to the Stars? That's his number one question. But you probably don't know any more than I do about that. What I do want to know is, what does your mother think about all this?
About the disclosure?
Yeah, about
and-
the New York
yes.
Times article,
Oh.
December 16th.
Oh, she was so excited. She was thrilled
Wow,
to
that's
see
great.
that. And of course, we're talking about the governmental
Yes.
Department of Defense
Yes.
office
Mhm.
that was revealed.
Yes.
She was so excited partly because she felt such an affinity for James McDonald.
Hmm.
She grieved for him for 20 years.
Wow.
And the feeling is, this is what he wanted to happen. He
Mhm.
wanted to have just a scientific office within the government taking this seriously. And so she was thrilled.
I bet.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And of course the poster child of that, Commander David Fravor, with
Mhm.
his 2004
Right.
sighting.
Yes.
That, wow, when you see that,
I know. When you listen to him and it
Yes.
explains, no rotor wash, going down to 50 feet below the water and
no
then
source
shooting
of
up.
pollution.
Yep.
Yes.
And propulsion.
no
Yeah.
propulsion.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I've actually reached out. I've been reaching out to David trying to get him on the show, but he hasn't responded. And
Yes.
a lot of people have to be, if they don't understand, like they don't understand my show, they don't understand other people's, just smaller shows, not the real big shows. I get the fact that they're trying to be careful because they don't want to appear fringe in any type of way.
Right.
They want to be taken seriously, and so they're very, very careful. And Leslie Kane, who's been on my show a number of times, she said she has to be, she has to wait for a while. She did go on Alejandro's show on Open Minds. And she will be on my show eventually. And the same thing with Ralph Blumenthal, the other writer of that particular article. He said he will be on eventually. But they have plans. And what they have plans, and you can tell this to your mother too, the New York Times is sort of involved in orchestrating the way things come out. Now, I know the Pentagon is really the one orchestrating it, but as far as what is released to keep the story active and alive, the New York Times has their hand in that. I can't really get the information out of either Ralph or Leslie, but there's more to come. We know there's, now I've heard a few people say that there's more like 12 videos. I don't really know. I'd love the chance to talk to Luis Elizondo directly, but I know there's at least one more video that's going to come out, and it's going to be fairly soon.
And if there's one, there are more.
Yeah.
And that Pentagon officials, governmental officials, CIA, FBI, that they've done a lot of research on this.
Yeah.
There's so much more that we don't know has happened.
Yeah.
So if I just wish that if they could get some of those old, from the 1950s.
Right.
Sightings and really redo them as well. I would
Well,
like to see
there's
them.
footage, that's gone to the government. I mean, many people have said it, including Gordon, the astronaut. I'm losing his last
Edgar?
No, Gordon.
Mitchell. Oh,
name. Anyway, a desert sighting. This little vehicle came down, put its feet down, and then took off, and it was filmed. There's that. There's the Jacob sighting out in California by Big Sur, where the missile was, the dummy warhead had the laser come out. That video went away. All these videos go away. They're going somewhere. And, maybe they're archived, maybe they're gone, destroyed. I don't know. There was also information from the JAL 1625 flight, the Japanese cargo plane that had that amazing UFO counter. I'm sure your mother followed every single one of these stories, didn't she?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And also, thank goodness that Dr. McDonald photocopied those 580 RV files from Maxwell Air Force Base. And so that's a piece of history right there as well. So it's just really exciting. I think it is very important that people do stay away from fringe, especially if they're associated with the government. But these are government people now talking out.
Yes.
You know, now this is ironic because I am in no way saying that government officials are more credible than the common person, because we know that some of them definitely are not, because their whole thing is spin, right? But to have these things come out from the Department of Defense is truly exciting.
It is. It is. And people that have been at it a long time
Right.
have said the same thing your mother has, more or less, like, wow, this is really, really something. Stan Friedman, when he was on my show right afterwards, said he wished he was 20 years younger. You know, and it's exciting times, and who knows where this is going to lead. It's going to be interesting to hear Stephen Bassett's talk Saturday, tomorrow, to hear what he has to say. He was on my panel the other night for a little while, but it's just, you know, I don't know if he'll know any more information than anyone else, but it's always good to hear that. What I love about doing this show is to hear the different takes that people have, you know, because there's a lot of really intelligent people, such as yourself, and I'm sure your mother, that are involved in this, that are curious, and that is the only thing we really can be, is curious. And like your mother said, she wanted to see either a body or a craft, you know, and I get that. But have you had the talk with her saying, well, if you had to guess, what would you think they are? Have you had that?
Sure, and she's written about that in several different places. She would say that the crafts that people report, the ones that cannot be explained, are just true mysteries.
That's where she would go.
She would say they are true mysteries, possibly of extraterrestrial origin. For the entities that people see often, or like nighttime visitors that people experience, she wrote a book called How to Defend Yourself Against Alien Abduction.
Oh, really?
Because, yes, because there were so many people coming to her saying that they had experienced harassing entities or abductions, things like that. So she has a lot of files and a lot of articles on those things.
How early on would you say that was?
Well, she would say that after McDonald died in 1971, in the 1970s, these abductee really rose.
I didn't realize that. I was thinking that was more like in the 80s and 90s where it started growing, and now it's there's
Right.
so many people saying that something's happening, and I know
Yeah.
some of it can be explained away, and then I've been on the fence about that a lot of, you know, my journey through all this. But then there's two things that come to mind. One is, if we are possibly being visited from extraterrestrial craft probe, whether probes or, you know, whether they're occupied or not, if we were going somewhere, we'd want to see the samples of the life there, you know. So there's that makes me wonder. They wouldn't just fly over us and go away, you know. I mean, maybe they are interested in us if they're extraterrestrial or whatever they are from somewhere else. And then the other thing is, there's some very credible cases, like I think Travis Walton, 100% credible case, the Allagash case, Betty and Barney Hill. These are all cases that I think, you know, hold a lot of water, and I think they're pretty solid cases. Why should that be the only ones there are? But the thing that I don't get, and I don't know if your mother's ever thought about this or talked about it, is why do they keep abducting? If they're doing it, why do they keep abducting the people over and over and over and over? You know, some people say it's for hybrid reasons or all that. Did she Did she try to follow up on any of those people that came to her when it came to?
Yeah, so her first book, which was written with D. Scott Rogo, is called The Tonga Canyon Contacts, and it centers around a series of sightings by a group of women in the Tonga Canyon.
I think I know about this case.
Yeah, it's
Is
really...
that the one where they cook them meals and stuff?
I believe they did.
Yeah.
It's been
I
a
think
while
there's
since
something
I've...
about
But
that.
evidently they took them aboard, they gave them information, and my mother said these are very credible witnesses. They went through hypnotic regression. There's no reason for them to make this up. There's no psychological reason why they're doing this, to get attention or something? No. And so she would say that these would be credible. She would still want to see evidence of it.
Yeah.
For some of the experiences that people have with, like, harassing, like where they keep coming, like, in the middle of the night and they bother people, my mom would say she thinks that they have less to do with UFOs, with the flying saucer itself, and more to do with possibly an experience between dimensions, like they're interdimensional beings. They're crossing some kind of dimension to visit these people. So that's what she would say about that they have less to do with, flying saucer occupants. But that it's very difficult to study them scientifically. It's very difficult, to find physical proof, or to, since the people seem to be in an altered state of consciousness, she thinks they're having some kind of interdimensional experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Going back real quickly, and we're just about ready to wrap it up here, going back to what you said a few minutes ago as far as, wouldn't it be great if we could know more about earlier sightings? I did pose that question to Alejandro, he's been talking to Luis Elizondo a lot. He's saying they only wanted to do contemporary cases as far as this goes. But one of the things, and I've mentioned this before, so pardon the usual listener for my redundancy, but one of the things that keeps coming up in all these hundreds of, news programs is, what if this is, technology unknown that one of our countries has? That crumbles apart when you go back in time, and the things were doing exactly the same thing 40 years ago, even 10 years ago, whatever, 20 years ago. So that's kind of where that sits, and I don't think a lot of people, I hear that argument come up, and then it's dropped, and then you don't hear any, no rebuttal against it. And if I was ever interviewed, I'd say, what about the past cases? Which is so true. There's so many radar cases where they've seen very similar things to the Nimitz case happen, in the past.
Could it be the same craft, or the same entities, or the same thing happening 60 years apart? Has anyone made a study of things that were strikingly similar between a 57 sighting and a 2017 sighting?
Yeah, Tic Tacs.
Right.
Yeah.
40-foot long Tic Tacs.
Well, thanks so much. The book, one more time, is called Firestorm.
Yes.
Right? And James McDonald, I'm so glad I finally had someone to talk to about James McDonald, because I've wanted to talk about that
That's right.
for quite a while.
And people can order this on AnnDruffle.com.
AnnDruffle.com.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank
I've really
you.
enjoyed meeting you as well.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I enjoyed creating it. It was, both these guests were just wonderful. I had such a fun time talking to them both. So, that's it for the show. Thanks so much for checking it out. And we'll be back next week with Roberto Pignotti. We'll be talking about UFOs over Italy. He's going to be up in the middle of the night talking to us here live. And remember, you can check out the website, podcastufo.com. There are some blogs. There's a forum. And also, I always forget to say this, we have a place where you can anonymously post-UFO sightings. And there's a bunch of them on there already. Really good reading. So go to podcastufo.com for that. So that's it. I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. Evan, the producer, Peggy Shunning, for helping out with the Facebook page. Our 2 guests, thanks so much. And thank you, the listener. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.